Julian Davenport discovered his wife's infidelity the moment she and Leo Martinez were tangled together on the living room floor. He calmly recorded a video, and by that evening, had severed every one of her family's financial lifelines. "Julian, please, let me explain." Clara Vance knelt, clutching the cuff of his pants. Julian kicked her away. "Is the floor cold? It's about to get a lot colder." When Julian Davenport pushed open the front door to his penthouse, the motion sensor lights in the foyer blinked on, casting a cold, white glare across the expensive Italian marble. A faint, cloying scent hung in the air. A men's cologne he didn't recognize, sweet and aggressive, a stark contrast to the crisp, woody fragrance he preferred. His brow furrowed slightly. He didn't bother taking off his shoes, his footsteps silent as he moved deeper into the apartment. From the far side of the living room came the sound of repressed, urgent gasps, like a dying animal, punctuated by the low moans of a woman. It was a voice Julian knew intimately, one that belonged to his wife, Clara. But now, that voice was thick with a kind of wild, unrestrained desire he had never heard from her before. Julian's heart felt as if it had been seized by an icy hand, squeezed tight, then abruptly released, leaving behind a hollow, searing pain and a strange numbness. He didn't charge in. He didn't even quicken his pace. He moved like a ghost, rounding the partition that separated the foyer from the living area. The enormous crystal chandelier he'd personally acquired at an auction in Stockholm was dark. Only a single floor lamp in the corner cast a dim, amber glow over the scene. The expensive, hand-woven wool rug had been kicked carelessly against the base of the sofa, and there, on the cold, polished marble floor, two bodies were entwined in a desperate, frantic embrace. Clara's long hair was fanned out around her head like black seaweed. She clung to the young, muscular man on top of her, her nails digging into the flesh of his back. Her head was thrown back, eyes glazed over, lips parted as she let out a string of broken whimpers. Julian recognized the man. It was Leo Martinez, Clara's so-called personal trainer. The coppery taste of blood surged into the back of Julian's throat, but he swallowed it down. His stomach churned, and for a split second, his vision went black. The next instant, an absolute, glacial coldness washed over him, extinguishing every flicker of emotion. He didn't roar in fury. He didn't lose control and rush forward to tear them apart. His breathing didn't even change its rhythm. He just stood there, a silent, dispassionate observer. Then, with excruciating slowness, he reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out his phone. He unlocked it, opened the camera app, and switched to video mode. His hands were perfectly steady. The faint light from the screen illuminated one side of his face, accentuating its chiseled planes. His eyes, however, were like ancient ice, bottomless and devoid of any warmth. He adjusted the angle, ensuring the frame was clear and stable, capturing the entire sordid scene in high definition. Through the lens, every detail was brutally clear. The ecstatic look on Clara's face, the crude force of Leo's movements, the cold gleam of the marble floor, even the diamond anklet he had personally fastened around her ankle just a few days ago. He recorded for a full 3 minutes. He stopped only when Leo let out a final, guttural cry and collapsed onto Clara, his breathing ragged and heavy. Dazed, Clara's eyes fluttered open. As she lazily lifted a hand to push the man off her, her gaze drifted toward the entrance of the living room. She froze. The flush of passion drained from her face, replaced by a ghastly, chalky white. Her pupils dilated in sheer terror. Her mouth opened, but only a choked, gasping sound came out. She couldn't form a single word as her body began to tremble violently, like a leaf in a storm. Leo, sensing her sudden change, whipped his head around to follow her gaze. When he saw the statue-like figure of Julian Davenport standing in the shadows, the smug satisfaction on his face dissolved into pure, primal fear. He scrambled off Clara like a scalded cat, fumbling for the clothes scattered on the floor to cover himself. "Mr. D. Davenport." Leo's voice was a cracked, terrified squeak. Finally, Julian moved. He pressed the stop button on his phone, and the screen went dark. He took a slow step forward. The sound of his leather shoes on the marble floor was sharp, steady, rhythmic, like a death knell. Tap, tap. He walked toward the two terrified figures in the center of the room. Clara found her voice, a desperate, shrill cry laced with tears. "Julian, it's not what it looks like. Let me explain. She was incoherent, her mind a blank slate of terror, unable to conjure even a passable lie. Julian stopped in front of them, looming over them. His gaze fell first on Leo, his expression utterly flat, as if he were looking at a piece of trash or an animal awaiting slaughter. Leo flinched under his stare, instinctively shrinking back, unable to meet his eyes. Then, Julian's gaze shifted to Clara, his wife. The woman he had once seen as pure and flawless, now naked and disheveled, her body marked by another man's lust, her eyes swimming with panic and pleas for mercy. This was the face he had once cherished with infinite tenderness. He crouched down, slowly, deliberately, bringing himself to her eye level. The movement held no warmth. It was the predatory assessment of a beast closing in on its prey, suffocating her with its presence. Clara, as if grabbing a final lifeline, lunged forward. Her cold, trembling fingers latched onto the perfectly pressed fabric of his suit trousers, tears streaming down her face. Julian, please believe me. It was him. He forced me. He did. I only love you. Please forgive me just this once. Please, just this once. Her knuckles were white from the force of her grip, her voice a raw, desperate whisper. Julian remained still, letting her cling to him. He simply looked at her, his eyes devoid of anger or sorrow. There was only a dead, bottomless cold. The silence that followed stretched for what felt like an eternity. Finally, his lips parted. His voice was low and even, without a ripple of emotion, but the words were like poison-tipped icicles plunging straight into Clara's heart. The floor, is it cold? Clara froze, her grip on his trousers slackening. A barely perceptible smirk touched Julian's lips, a cruel, razor-thin curve. Soon, he added, you'll learn what cold really is. With that, he rose to his feet in one fluid motion, ruthlessly shaking her hand from his leg. The force sent her sprawling, her forehead cracking against the hard marble floor with a sickening thud. He didn't spare either of them another glance, as if the sight of them was too disgusting to bear. He turned and walked away, his stride as steady as when he'd arrived, but now imbued with an unshakable finality, leaving the tainted space filled with the stench of betrayal and lust. The heavy, solid wood door slammed shut behind him, cutting off Clara's sudden, heart-wrenching sob. In the living room, there was nothing left but a bone-deep chill and suffocating despair. Leo stared at the closed door, then at the broken, weeping woman beside him, her forehead already swelling and red. A profound, icy dread seized him. He shivered violently and began yanking on his pants, muttering to himself, "It's over. It's all over. He knows. He's going to kill me. I have to get out of here. I have to go now." Fear had erased any thought of the naked, pathetic woman on the floor. His only instinct was to flee the place that was about to become his personal hell. Meanwhile, Julian settled into the back seat of his sleek, black Bentley. The car was silent except for the sound of his own steady breathing. He took out his phone. The screen was still on the video player. His fingertips were cold, but his movements were precise and unwavering. Without a moment's hesitation, he packaged the high-definition video he'd just taken, along with several screenshots of Clara and Leo's naked entanglement. Then he opened his contacts and found the entry labeled Mark Jennings, CFO, Vance Enterprises. The call connected almost instantly. "Mr. Davenport?" a respectful voice answered. Julian's voice, filtered through the car's Bluetooth system, filled the enclosed space. It was terrifyingly calm, carrying the indisputable weight of a verdict. "Mark, it's me. Activate Protocol 0. Immediately." There was a brief silence on the other end. Mark Jennings clearly understood the gravity of the command. Protocol 0 was the ultimate contingency plan Julian had secretly put in place within the financial core of Vance Enterprises shortly after Clara had married into the Davenport family. It was a sword of Damocles hanging over her family's head. Once activated, all liquid capital and guaranteed loans from Davenport Industries to Vance Enterprises would be frozen instantly. All ongoing projects led or backed by Davenport would be halted. The Vance family's own accounts would be placed under intense scrutiny, preventing any significant fund transfers. It was the equivalent of instantly severing the company's jugular. "Yes, Mr. Davenport. Right away." Mark's voice held no hesitation, only absolute obedience. As a loyal executive Julian had personally placed within the company, he was well aware of the young CEO's iron will. Also, Julian continued, his tone unchanging as he issued the next command: notify all affiliated banks, financial institutions, and partners of Davenport Industries. Effective immediately, they are to cut off all non-essential financial dealings with Vance Enterprises and any accounts held by the immediate Vance family. Any attempt to provide financial aid to them will be considered a declaration of war against Davenport Industries. "Understood. I'll get on it right now, sir." Mark's voice carried a hint of barely suppressed tension. "One more thing," Julian added, his gaze fixed on the blur of city lights speeding past the window, his eyes as dark as an abyss. "I want a full trace on all recent large-scale expenditures from Clara's personal accounts, especially anything connected to this Leo Martinez. I want the most detailed report possible. Within the hour." "Yes, sir." The call ended. Silence once again descended upon the car. Julian leaned back against the leather seat and closed his eyes. His phone screen was still illuminated, frozen on Leo's face, contorted in pleasure. The cold, electronic glow cast a harsh line across his sharp jaw, tracing a cruel and unyielding arc. The engine hummed, a low, powerful thrum as the car merged seamlessly into the river of nighttime traffic. A silent, devastating storm, set in motion by a single phone call from Julian Davenport, was already gathering force in the dead of night, poised to grind the entire Vance family into dust. And at the center of that storm, the woman who had just plummeted from ecstasy to terror was still lying on the cold marble floor, utterly oblivious to the impending annihilation. "Mr. Davenport, all directives have been executed." Mark Jennings' voice came through the speakerphone, echoing in the vast, top-floor executive office of Davenport Industries. It was tight with the strain of having completed a monumental task. "All Vance-related accounts and project funds have been frozen. The notifications have been sent to all our partners. So far, no one has raised any objections." Julian stood before the immense floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the city spread out below him like a giant chessboard. The first light of dawn was breaking through the clouds, falling on him but failing to dispel the deep chill that surrounded him. He grunted in acknowledgement, his eyes still fixed on the horizon, as if watching a play that was about to begin. Additionally, Mark continued, his pace quickening regarding Clara Vance's personal accounts. "We ran an emergency trace. Over the last 3 months, there are 7 large transfers to the same private account, registered under the name Leo Martinez. The total amount exceeds $870,000. The transaction memos were all for things like personal training fees and fitness equipment purchases." A note of undisguised contempt crept into Mark's voice. A cold smirk twisted Julian's lips. "Personal trainer? $870,000 for training sessions? What a shameless pair of animals." "Excellent." He turned and walked back to the massive desk that symbolized the pinnacle of his power. "This Leo Martinez, have you dug up his background?" "We have." Mark responded immediately. "Leo Martinez, 27. He bills himself as a high-end personal trainer, but in reality, he's a professional gigolo who preys on wealthy women. He's currently juggling at least 4 of them, including Miss Vance. We've obtained detailed records of his dealings with the other women, text messages, hotel receipts, bank transfers. It's all here. One of them, a woman named Brenda Russo, is the wife of Tony Russo, the head of Russo Construction Supplies. She has a notoriously explosive temper." Julian's fingers tapped a light, rhythmic beat on the polished surface of his desk. "A professional gigolo? Specializing in married women? Perfect. That would save him the trouble of finding the man's weakness. Send the evidence of Martinez's affairs." Julian's voice was placid, but each word was a razor's edge, especially the part about him and Brenda Russo, to Brenda herself. "Anonymously. Make sure she receives it immediately, and make sure she's the only one who gets it. Keep the evidence on the other women for now." On the other end of the line, Mark instantly understood his boss's intent. A chill ran down his spine. This was ordering a hit, using someone else as the weapon. And it was the most vicious, merciless kind. Brenda Russo was famously volatile and jealous, and her husband, Tony, had a reputation for being a ruthless man who'd come up the hard way. For Leo to be sleeping with his wife and taking her money, if that got out. "Understood. I'll arrange it at once, Mr. Davenport." Mark's voice trembled slightly. "Also," Julian added, his eyes darkening, "leak some information to those old, complacent board members at Vance Enterprises, the ones who always bend to Clara's will. Let them know that Davenport Industries' total freeze is because the Vance family's precious daughter has behaved disgracefully and thoroughly enraged the Davenports. As for how she was disgraceful, let them figure that out for themselves." "Yes, sir. I'll see to it." The call ended. The office was quiet again. Julian leaned back in his large leather chair, picking up an elegant metal lighter from his desk. He flicked it open and shut with a crisp metallic click. The cold touch of the metal against his fingertips provided a small, chilling outlet for the repressed, destructive urge churning inside him. First, use Brenda Russo, the sharpest knife, to neuter that stray dog, Leo. Then, let the parasites inside Vance Enterprises, driven by panic and suspicion, turn on Clara, tear her apart. This was only the beginning. He was going to carve them up, piece by piece, and watch them rot in their own fear and agony. At that moment, Clara Vance was curled up in her luxurious but cold bedroom in her family's Greenwich estate. The curtains were drawn tight, plunging the room into darkness. Since Julian had caught her yesterday and kicked her aside, she had been a terrified wreck, fleeing back to her parents' home. The bruise on her forehead still throbbed, but the pain was nothing compared to the massive, gnawing void of fear and despair in her chest. She had tried calling Julian's number countless times, but it always went straight to voicemail. Her texts went unanswered. With his absolute silence, Julian had pronounced her death sentence. Her phone suddenly vibrated violently. The screen lit up with the word "Dad." Clara scrambled for it like a drowning woman grasping for a rope. "Dad!" But what came from the other end wasn't her father's comfort, but a roar of unprecedented fury from Arthur Vance, his voice raw and filled with the desperation of a man on the brink. "Clara, you little monster. What the hell did you do? Huh? The Davenports? Julian, he's cut us off at the knees. All our money, all our projects, everything's frozen. The banks are calling in our loans. Our partners are pulling out. Our suppliers are at the gates demanding payment. We can't move a single dollar from our accounts. Tell me, what did you do to piss him off this badly?" Clara was stunned by her father's tirade. An overwhelming fear seized her, and her teeth began to chatter. "Dad, I didn't. It was Julian. You didn't." Arthur's voice was distorted with rage. "Do you take me for a fool? A man like Julian Davenport doesn't go for the throat like this without a damn good reason. That snake Mark Jennings was dropping hints that it was you, that you did something unforgivable. Were you sleeping around? Huh?" He couldn't bring himself to scream the last part, but the implication was crystal clear. "I wasn't. Dad, believe me." Clara sobbed her denial, but the guilt in her voice was so thick she couldn't even fool herself. "Believe you? How can I believe you?" Arthur's voice cracked with a sob of his own. "Vance Enterprises is finished. We're finished. Because of you. You shameless little tramp. I'm telling you right now. Get your ass over there and beg Julian Davenport for forgiveness. Get on your knees. I don't care what you have to do. Beg him to show us some mercy. If you don't, I'll kill myself. We'll all be jumping off a bridge, and it will be on your head." The line went dead with a brutal click. Clara held the phone, her body ice cold, as if she'd been plunged into a frozen lake. Her father's desperate screams echoed in her ears. The company was finished? Julian had really done it? So fast, so ruthlessly, all because she and Leo. No, she couldn't just sit here and die. She had to find Julian. She had to explain. She had to fix this, even if she had to crawl to him on her hands and knees. Like a madwoman, Clara scrambled out of bed. Ignoring the pain in her head and body, she threw on some clothes, grabbed her car keys, and bolted out the door. At the same time, in a gaudy, gilded mansion in another part of town, Brenda Russo, wife of Tony Russo, was reclining in a salon chair. A woman whose well-maintained figure couldn't hide the hard, cruel set of her eyes. She was enjoying a facial from her esthetician. Her phone chimed, a notification for an encrypted email. She tapped it open casually. The next second, a blood-curdling scream ripped through the serene salon. "Ea!" Brenda shot up from the chair, the facial mask cracking and peeling from her face as she moved, revealing a visage twisted in shock and fury. She stared at her phone screen, her eyes nearly bulging from their sockets. Displayed in crystal clarity were graphic photos of Leo Martinez in bed with another woman in a hotel room, along with screenshots of explicit text messages he'd sent to several other women. Among them were the same sweet nothings he'd whispered to her, right alongside his request for money. "Leo Martinez, you son of a bitch. You goddamn parasite. You take my money. You use my things. And you dare to cheat on me behind my back. With this many." Brenda's screech was the sound of a cornered animal, filled with hysterical rage. Her body trembled with fury. She shoved the terrified esthetician aside and stormed out of the room like a rampaging lioness. "Get the car," she bellowed to the staff downstairs. "And get Tony's guys. I want Frank and the boys with me." Her voice was raw with hatred. "We're going to Apex Elite Fitness. I'm going to skin that bastard alive." The VIP training area at Apex Elite Fitness was sleek and exclusive, the equipment gleaming under recessed lighting. Leo Martinez had just finished a session and was admiring his own muscular physique in the mirror, feeling pretty good about himself. Although getting caught by Julian Davenport yesterday had been terrifying, he'd had time to think. A man of Davenport's stature would want to protect his reputation. He probably wouldn't make a big public scene. And that woman, Clara, sure, she was scared out of her mind, but her family still had money. He could probably squeeze a little more out of her before he skipped town. He was busy plotting how to handle Clara when the heavy, frosted glass door to the private training area was kicked open with a thunderous crash. Bang! Everyone in the vicinity flinched, turning to stare at the entrance. Brenda Russo stormed in like an erupting volcano, flanked by 4 hulking men with hard faces and the unmistakable look of hired muscle. Her eyes, burning with rage, immediately locked onto Leo. Leo Martinez, I'll kill your entire family. Brenda's spittle nearly hit him in the face. She jabbed a finger at him, her voice shrill enough to shatter glass. You cheap 2-bit gigolo. You lied to me, took my money, and you dare to cheat on me. You've been busy, haven't you? One wasn't enough. You needed a whole damn collection. The moment Leo saw Brenda and the menacing figures behind her, the color drained from his face. A roar filled his ears. It was over. He'd been exposed. Davenport. It had to be Davenport. An avalanche of terror crushed him. He wanted to run, but his legs felt like they were encased in cement. Brenda, baby, listen to me. It's all fake. Someone's trying to set me up. Leo's voice trembled uncontrollably as he tried to plead his case. Explain this. Brenda didn't let him finish. She lunged at him like a furious beast, her long, sharp nails clawing at his handsome face. Get him. Beat the shit out of him. Break his goddamn legs. Wreck that pretty lying face of his. At her command, the 4 brutes descended on him like a pack of wolves. Fists the size of cinder blocks and steel-toed boots rained down on Leo's body. A scream like a slaughtered pig echoed through the gym. The sickening thud of fists hitting flesh, the sharp crack of breaking bones, and Leo's agonized cries for mercy blended into a horrific symphony. The other gym members and staff watched in pale-faced horror, backing away, not a single one daring to intervene. Leo was beaten to the ground, curled into a fetal position, feebly trying to shield his head. The thugs were clearly professionals, their blows calculated to inflict maximum pain without being immediately fatal. They targeted his ribs, his limbs, his gut, places that would leave him broken but alive. Brenda, please, mercy. My leg, my ribs. They're broken. They're really broken. Leo's plea soon dissolved into agonized groans. He felt at least 2 ribs snap, the blinding pain nearly causing him to pass out. One of his arms was bent at a sickening, unnatural angle. Brenda stood over him, hands on her hips, her chest heaving. She watched him writhe on the floor, her face a mask of cruel, triumphant satisfaction. Scum! She spat a thick glob of phlegm onto his battered face. This is what you get for playing me. Drag his ass out of here. Dump him on the street. Let everyone see what happens to a 2-timing gigolo. Like they were handling a carcass, 2 of the thugs grabbed Leo by his ankles and arms. They dragged him roughly across the floor, leaving a smear of blood in their wake, and hauled him toward the gym's main entrance. A dead silence fell over the training area, broken only by shaky breaths and stifled gasps. The air was thick with the faint, metallic scent of blood and fear. No one noticed a man in a plain t-shirt and a baseball cap, standing in a discreet corner on the second-floor mezzanine. He was calmly holding his phone, recording the entire brutal scene below. The high-definition lens captured every gruesome detail. Leo spitting up blood, his broken limbs, Brenda's twisted, gleeful expression. When the video was finished, he quietly put his phone away and vanished down a service stairwell. In the executive office of Davenport Industries, Julian Davenport watched the same silent, bloody footage play out on his computer screen. Leo, beaten to a pulp, writhing on the floor, his bones breaking, finally being dragged away like a side of meat. Every moment was rendered in perfect clarity. Julian leaned back in his chair, a glass of whiskey in his hand, the amber liquid swirling gently. He watched the screen, his face an impassive mask, as if he were viewing a boring documentary. Only when he saw Leo's unnaturally bent limbs and the blood bubbling from his mouth did Julian raise the glass to his lips and take a small sip. The fiery liquid slid down his throat, bringing a fleeting warmth. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. Did you receive the video? Yes, Mr. Davenport. It's very clear. The voice on the other end was filled with a new level of awe and fear. Good. Julian's gaze returned to the screen, to Leo's bloodied, tear-streaked face. Save a backup. Send a copy to Clara Vance. Now. Yes, sir. Julian hung up and drained the rest of his whiskey in one swallow. The cold glass pressed against his palm. This was just the first drop of blood. Enjoy the show, Clara, he thought. This is just a preview of your personal hell. Clara had stormed the Davenport Industries headquarters like a woman possessed. The towering glass facade reflected the cold sunlight, a perfect mirror of Julian's heart. She made a desperate dash for the private executive elevator, but was blocked by a security guard built like a brick wall. Ma'am, I'm sorry. Without an appointment or Mr. Davenport's express permission, you can't go up. The guard's voice was robotic, but his eyes held a flicker of contempt. The directive had clearly come from the top. I'm his wife. Let me up. I need to see him. Mr. Davenport gave specific orders, especially regarding you, ma'am. You are not to set foot in this building without his permission. The guard's arm was an immovable iron bar. The force of his block sent Clara stumbling back, nearly snapping the heel of her shoe. A wave of profound humiliation and despair washed over her. She used to be the queen of this castle, free to come and go as she pleased. Now, she wasn't even allowed to get close to him. She retreated to a corner of the grand lobby, a broken doll discarded in the shadows. Her phone was vibrating incessantly in her purse. With trembling hands, she pulled it out. The screen was flooded with missed calls and frantic texts from her father, her mother, the company's board members. They were all a variation on the same theme: hysterical curses and desperate demands. Vance Enterprises was truly finished. Because of her, just as she felt her sanity start to fray, her phone chimed again. This time, it was an encrypted message from an unknown number. No text, just a video file. A sense of deep foreboding seized her. Her fingers shook as she tapped the screen. The video loaded instantly, filling her ears with the sounds of brutal impacts and agonized screams. It was Leo, her lover, with whom she had been wrapped in passion just hours before. But his appearance now made her stomach heave, and she nearly vomited on the polished lobby floor. He was on the ground, beaten into a bloody, twisted heap. His handsome face was swollen and disfigured, caked in grime and blood. When I was puffed shut, a group of vicious-looking men surrounded him, their fists and feet falling like hammers, making a series of dull, terrifying thuds. Each blow was punctuated by Leo's gut-wrenching screams and the sickening crack of bone. Art, please. Brenda, spare me. My leg. It's broken. It's really broken. Leo's cries were like those of a dying animal. The camera panned to a woman standing nearby, Brenda Russo, her face contorted with rage and satisfaction, a demon from hell. Her shrill curses cut through the screen. Hit him harder. Break all 3 of his legs. That'll teach him to cheat on me. That'll teach him to play women. The video ended with Leo, a limp, broken mess, being dragged away by his ankles, leaving a long, crimson smear on the floor. The final frame was a close-up of his face, a bloody, tear-streaked mask of ultimate terror and pain. Oh God! Clara clamped a hand over her mouth and rushed to a nearby trash can, dry heaving violently. An icy terror, like a venomous snake, coiled around her heart, squeezing the air from her lungs. Leo, beaten like that, his bones broken, dragged away like garbage. Who did this? Brenda? That tigress. How could she have known? How could she have acted so fast? One name, cold and sharp, sliced through her panic. Julian Davenport. It could only be him. Only Julian had the power, the motive, and the ruthless precision to find Leo's weakness and turn someone else into his weapon. And so quickly, he caught them yesterday and today. A chill shot up from the soles of her feet to the crown of her head. She looked at the image of Leo's ruined face on her phone and saw a terrifying glimpse of her own future. Julian wasn't going to let her go. He was using Leo's blood to send her a message. Just then, her phone rang again, Dad flashing on the screen. Clara answered it desperately, her voice a choked, terrified sob. Dad, I saw it. Leo, Shut up. You jinx. You curse on this family. On the other end, Arthur Vance's voice was a ragged, dying rasp, filled with a furious despair. They dumped garbage all over the entrance to the office. Suppliers broke the windows. The bankers are here with court orders, sitting in my office. Your mother had a heart attack. She's in the ICU. It's all because of you. Because you were screwing around. You shameless bitch. Why don't you just die? Dad, Mom. The words hit Clara like a physical blow. Don't call me Dad. I don't have a daughter like you. I'm telling you, Clara, either you go and beg Julian Davenport to spare us right now, or you can get ready to bury me and your mother. We'll all die, and it will be on you. Arthur slammed the phone down, leaving only the dial tone. Her mother in the ICU. Her father threatening to kill himself and the whole family. The immense pressure and terror finally broke her. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the cold marble floor, her phone slipping from her hand. The screen still showed Leo's brutalized face. She buried her face in her hands and let out a repressed, wounded sob. No, she couldn't let her parents die. She had to see Julian. She had to. A desperate, insane idea began to form in her mind. She looked up, her eyes flashing with a final, reckless determination. She couldn't get in through the front, so she would climb. She struggled to her feet and ran out of the Davenport building, circling around to the back where the fire escape was less visible. Thankfully, the security here was less strict. Gritting her teeth, she shoved open the heavy fire door and began to climb the cold, empty stairwell, step by painful step. She had kicked off her heels long ago. Her bare feet on the rough concrete steps were quickly scraped raw, leaving small bloody prints behind her. Sweat soaked her clothes, and the bruise on her forehead throbbed with every heartbeat. But she didn't care. There was only one thought in her mind: get to the top floor. Find Julian. Beg him. 28 floors. When Clara finally pushed open the top floor fire escape door, she was gasping, disheveled, and nearly delirious with exhaustion. She leaned against the cool wall, panting for breath, her vision blurry as she tried to find the executive office. Julian's chief of staff, David Carter, was just leaving the secretarial area with a folder when he saw her. He jumped, his expression immediately hardening. "Mrs. Davenport, how did you get up here?" "Security." "Don't." Clara lunged, grabbing David's arm with surprising strength, her nails digging into his suit. "Let me see Julian. Please. I'm begging you. Just for a minute. 1 minute." She was a mess of tears and snot, completely unhinged. David frowned, trying to pull away. "Ma'am, Mr. Davenport has given orders not to be disturbed, especially by you. Please leave immediately, or I will have you removed." "No, I'm not leaving. I have to see him. Julian Davenport. Come out here." Clara shoved David aside and threw herself, like a human cannonball, at the massive, imposing walnut doors of the CEO's office. Thud! She slammed into solid wood, the impact jarring her whole body. Ignoring the pain, she began beating on the doors with all her might, her voice a desperate, wailing cry. "Julian, open the door. Please. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. Spare my parents. Spare my family. Do whatever you want of me. Please. Julian, open the door." Inside the office, Julian stood with his back to the door, looking out the window. Clara's shrill cries and frantic pounding were clearly audible, a discordant noise polluting his perfect sanctuary. He turned around slowly, his gaze falling on the trembling doors. His face was a blank canvas, as if the commotion outside was nothing more than an annoying fly. David had already returned with 2 large security guards, who were trying to drag the hysterical Clara away. "Let go of me, Julian Davenport. You cold-blooded bastard. Come out. Face me." Clara fought them with the last of her strength, her hair wild, her clothes torn. Just as the guards were about to overpower her, the heavy walnut doors swung silently open. Julian stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed, his posture perfect. He looked down at the chaotic scene, his expression terrifyingly calm, as if observing a poorly performed circus act. When Clara saw the door open, saw Julian, a desperate, drowning hope flared in her eyes. She tore herself free from the guards and threw herself to the ground. On her hands and knees, she crawled to Julian's feet, wrapping her arms around his polished leather shoes, pressing her forehead against them. Julian, you finally see me? I was wrong. I was so wrong. I was out of my mind. I betrayed you. Punish me however you want. Hit me, curse me, kill me. Just please, spare my parents. Spare my family. They're innocent. Please, for the sake of our marriage. Please." She was utterly debased, banging her head on the cold floor with a series of dull thuds. The entire top-floor office was dead silent. Every assistant and secretary held their breath, watching with a mixture of horror and morbid fascination. The once proud Mrs. Davenport was now groveling like a beggar at her husband's feet. Julian didn't move. He let her cling to his shoes, let her tears and snot soil the expensive leather. His eyes slowly traveled over her bare, bleeding feet, the fresh bruises on her forehead, her filthy, tangled hair. Then, his gaze settled on her chest, heaving with desperate sobs. That body, which he had once desired, now filled him with nothing but disgust. Time seemed to freeze. Finally, Julian bent down, his movements slow and elegant. He didn't reach out to help her up. Instead, his hand shot out. Clara thought he had finally softened. A delirious joy lit her tear-filled eyes as she looked up at him. Julian, but his hand wasn't for her. The hand that had once caressed her so tenderly, now closed with cold, unyielding force, grabbing a fistful of her long, messy hair. "Arg," she shrieked. Julian's face was a mask of cold fury. He yanked her head back, pulling her halfway to her feet. Crack! A sharp, explosive slap echoed through the silent office. Using her hair as a leash, he had hauled her up and, with a vicious swing, struck her across the face. The force of the blow sent her flying sideways, crashing onto the hard marble floor several feet away. Her cheek immediately swelled, a perfect red imprint of his hand blooming on her skin. Her lips split, and blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. Her ears rang, and she saw stars. She lay there, stunned, the pain and shock rendering her unable to think, only to feel a bottomless, unbelievable terror. He had hit her, in public, like an animal. Julian stood over her, calmly pulling a pristine white handkerchief from his pocket. He meticulously wiped the fingers that had touched her hair, as if cleansing them of a deadly contagion. His voice was low, flat, and sharp as a shard of ice, piercing the ears of everyone present. "Filth!" He tossed the used handkerchief into a nearby trash can without a second glance at the broken woman on the floor. His cold eyes swept over the security guards. "Clean this up." He turned and walked back into his office. The heavy walnut door closed silently behind him, shutting out the world and shutting out the last glimmer of Clara's hope. The two guards moved in. Like they were hauling away garbage, they lifted the limp, bleeding, and utterly broken Clara and dragged her toward the elevator. The top floor returned to its tomb-like silence, the closed door a silent testament to a cold, final judgment. Clara was dumped like a bag of trash at the entrance of her family's estate. She was a hollow shell, an automaton, barely registering the weeping housekeeper who helped her inside. The side of her face was on fire, her ears were still ringing, and Julian's cold, single word, "filth," replayed in her mind on an endless, torturous loop. The atmosphere in the house was as oppressive as a tomb. The staff moved like ghosts, tiptoeing around in silence. Arthur Vance had locked himself in his study, the sound of breaking glass occasionally punctuating the quiet. Her mother's ICU bills loomed like a mountain, while the company was completely paralyzed, besieged by a constant barrage of texts and calls from creditors. Clara locked herself in her room, refusing to eat or drink. She hid in the darkness, curtains drawn, trembling in a corner. Fear was a vine, wrapping around her, squeezing tighter and tighter. She knew Julian's revenge was far from over. What had happened to Leo was just a warning. What would he do to her? Break her legs? Destroy her face? Or her phone, discarded in a corner, suddenly erupted in a cacophony of notifications. It wasn't calls, but alerts from every social media and news app, a relentless storm of chimes and vibrations. The sound made Clara flinch violently. A terrible premonition made her heart hammer against her ribs. With a trembling hand, she picked up the phone. The screen lit up, instantly flooded with push notifications. Every headline was a poison-tipped needle stabbing in her eyes. Breaking. HD nude photos of Davenport CEO's wife Clara Vance leaked. Shocking content. Tycoon scandal. Clara Vance cheats with personal trainer. Explicit photos go viral. Bombshell. Full record of Clara Vance and Leo Martinez hotel trysts. Video plus pics. Socialite's downfall. Clara Vance's pristine image shattered. Julian Davenport cuckolded. Full details of Clara Vance's affair exposed. The blood froze in Clara's veins. Her fingers shook so badly she could barely hold the phone. She tapped on one of the links. High-definition images loaded instantly. It was her and Leo, in a hotel bed, naked, in graphic, obscene poses. Some photos were so clear you could see the ecstatic expression on her face and the smug look on his. The angles were devious, clearly taken by a hidden camera. And it wasn't just one photo. There were dozens. Different times, different places. But the man was always Leo. The backdrops included hotels, the back seat of a car, and even the bed in the master bedroom of her and Julian's penthouse. No, it's not possible. How? Clara's mind went blank. An icy coldness plunged her into a frozen abyss. How were these photos taken? And in such high quality? Was it Leo? Did he secretly record them? Or was it Julian? Frantically, she clicked another link. This one was a video. The setting was unmistakably the bedroom of her penthouse. In the video, she was wearing a sexy nightgown actively pulling Leo in for a kiss before they tumbled onto the bed. While the most explicit parts were blurred, her face, Leo's face, and the room's layout were all crystal clear. Below the video, the comment section was a tidal wave of filth and vicious mockery, each word a knife twisting in her soul. Slut. Julian Davenport is a god, and she cheats on him? Is she blind? This chick has balls, doing it with another guy in her husband's bed. Damn. Clara Vance? More like Clara the Tramp. Her family's company is toast. Serves them right. I feel so bad for Julian. A bitch like that should be burned at the stake. Link to the uncensored version. Asking for a friend. Clara stared at the venomous comments, at the images of her own body being passed around, mocked, and judged by millions of strangers. She felt like she was being publicly executed, her skin flayed open for the world to see. Yeah, a horrifying, primal scream tore from her throat. She hurled the phone against the wall with all her might. It shattered into pieces, but it was useless. She knew it was useless. The photos and videos were already spreading like a virus. Her face, her body, her most shameful secrets, broadcast to the entire world. She was finished, utterly, completely finished, socially executed. It was a fate worse than death. Why? Julian, why would you do this to me? Clara shrieked, clawing at her own hair, her nails scraping bloody tracks across her scalp. Shame and despair consumed her. Just then, her bedroom door was thrown open with a violent bang. Arthur Vance stormed in, his eyes bloodshot, looking like a rabid animal. He was holding a stack of freshly printed papers, which he hurled at Clara's face. Look at what you've done, you worthless whore. Arthur's voice was a distorted, spittle-flecked roar. The papers scattered across the floor. Clara looked down and felt as if she'd been plunged into a frozen hell. They weren't documents. They were high-quality, color printouts of her nude photos. Dad, Shut up. I'm not your father. Arthur raised his hand and, with all the force he could muster, slapped her across the other side of her face. Crack. The blow was harder, more brutal than Julian's. It sent her sprawling to the floor. Her ears rang, her vision swam, and both of her cheeks were now swollen and throbbing. Blood dripped from her busted lip. Davenport's legal team just sent this. Arthur screamed, pointing a trembling finger at her. They're suing you for adultery, for causing severe damage to the Davenport brand. They're demanding damages for reputational harm. $100 million. $100 million. We couldn't pay that if we sold you piece by piece. And because of you, all of our existing contracts are now in breach. The penalties alone will bankrupt us 100 times over. The bank is foreclosing on this house. On the company, we're about to be thrown out onto the street. And your mother is in the ICU, needing money to stay alive. It's all your fault. You did this, you shameless bitch. Why don't you just die? As he finished his tirade, Arthur's chest heaved. His face turned a dark purple. Suddenly he swayed, clutching his chest, his face contorting in agony. He fell backward, stiff as a board. Dad! Clara screamed in terror. Arthur hit the floor with a heavy thud. His eyes were wide open. His body convulsed once, twice, and then was still. Dad! Dad, what's wrong? Don't scare me. Clara scrambled over to him, shaking his body frantically. But there was no response. His chest was no longer moving. With a trembling hand, she checked for his breath. There was nothing. Ow! Dad! A devastating, heart-shattering scream echoed through the dead silence of the Vance estate. The terrified staff huddled at the doorway, staring at the hellish scene within. The floor littered with pornographic photos, the daughter a bloody, crazed mess, and the master of the house, lying dead on the floor, his eyes wide with a final, silent accusation. Clara cradled her father's body, still warm but rapidly stiffening, and sobbed until her throat was raw. Grief and regret were a poison, eating her alive from the inside. It was over. Everything was over. She had literally scared her father to death. Her mother was in a coma. Her family was destroyed. And she was a pariah, a national joke. Julian Davenport, you're a monster. A true monster. Her father's sudden death was the final blow. It shattered what was left of Clara's spirit. She became a walking ghost, not eating, not speaking, just curled up in a corner of the room where her father's casket lay. Her face was still swollen, her lip crusted with dry blood. Her eyes were terrifyingly vacant, with only an occasional flash of venom to show she was still alive. The funeral was a pathetic, rushed affair. The once popular Vance family was now radioactive. Only a few distant relatives showed up, their faces masks of pity and poorly concealed disgust. Outside, the creditors and collections agents circled like sharks. Clara's mother remained in the ICU, a ventilator breathing for her, the bills paid by some minimal, anonymous fund that Clara knew could only have come from Julian, a cruel, calculated act of charity. After the funeral, the Greenwich estate was officially seized by the bank. Clara and the family's one remaining loyal housekeeper, Maria, were evicted. With just a few suitcases, they moved into a dilapidated, moldy apartment in a rundown neighborhood in Queens. It was all Maria could afford on her own savings. The fall from grace was absolute. The squalor only made Clara more silent, more withdrawn. Her only remaining obsession was her face, the face that had once been her greatest asset and was now a symbol of her shame. She would lock herself in the tiny, grimy bathroom and stare into the stained mirror, endlessly washing her bruised cheeks, trying to cover the marks of her disgrace with cheap drugstore foundation. That face was the last shred of her pride. One afternoon, the doorbell rang. Maria opened it to find a well-dressed man holding an elegant gift box. "Good afternoon. I'm looking for Miss Clara Vance," the man asked politely. Who are you?" Maria asked, wary. "My name is Mr. Lee. I'm the lead consultant for Elysian Aesthetics," the man said, offering a gold-embossed business card. "I was sent to deliver a gift to Miss Vance." He gestured to the box in his hands. It was exquisitely packaged, bearing the Elysian logo, an ultra-exclusive, bespoke skincare brand that catered only to the world's wealthiest elite. Maria was stunned. Why would a place like that be sending a gift to Clara now? Hearing the voices, Clara emerged from her room. When she saw the Elysian box, a strange light flickered in her dead eyes. Elysian. It was her old sanctuary. Their custom-made facial treatments worked miracles. They were the secret to her once flawless complexion. For me, Clara's voice was a dry, hoarse whisper, laced with disbelief and a desperate sliver of hope. Could it be Julian? Had his anger cooled? Was he feeling nostalgic? Did he see how pathetic she had become and feel a pang of pity? Or maybe he still couldn't bear the thought of her beautiful face being ruined? "Yes, Miss Vance." "Mr. Lee smiled and presented the box. "This is our newest creation, the Renewal Elixir, a globally exclusive formula with results that far surpass anything we've offered before. The benefactor who sent this specifically requested that you use it personally. He said you would be surprised." Clara's hands trembled as she took the heavy box. The coldness of it sent a perverse warmth through her. It had to be him. It had to be Julian. He still cared about her. He still cared about her face. Maybe this was her chance. If she could just get her looks back, apologize properly. Maybe there was still a chance to salvage something from this wreck. A tidal wave of longing washed away the tiny voice of doubt in the back of her mind. She had nothing left. Only this face. It was her only hope. "Thank you. Thank you." Clara clutched the box to her chest like a holy relic. "Mr. Lee gave a slight bow and turned to leave, a cold, imperceptible smile playing on his lips. That night, in the cramped and squalid bathroom, Clara eagerly opened the luxurious box. Inside, 10 individually wrapped facial masks were nestled in silk. The packaging was adorned with intricate designs and the words, "Elysian, the Renewal Elixir." A faint, strange, herbal scent emanated from them. She carefully took one out. Following the instructions, she washed her face and then, with an almost religious reverence, applied the cool, damp mask to her swollen, bruised skin. The moment it touched her face, an intense, stimulating coolness seeped into her skin, providing a brief, blessed relief to her aching cheeks. She closed her eyes and leaned against the cold tile wall, dreaming of the moment she would peel it off to find the swelling gone, the bruises faded, her former beauty restored. But the soothing sensation lasted only a few minutes. Slowly, an unbearable heat began to radiate from beneath the mask. It grew stronger, hotter, like 1,000 red-hot needles stabbing her all at once. "HSS." Clara winced, instinctively reaching for her face, but she remembered the instructions. A mild warming sensation is normal during the initial detoxification process. She forced her hand back down. Elysian products were always potent. Maybe she just had to endure it. But the burning didn't subside. It intensified, spreading like wildfire. Within minutes, the sensation had become an agonizing, corrosive pain, as if someone had thrown acid on her face. "Aya!" Clara's eyes flew open. She screamed in terror and, forgetting the instructions, clawed frantically at the mask on her face. Rip! The mask came off, but what she saw in the mirror was a vision from a nightmare. Her once beautiful face looked like it had been scorched by hellfire. The areas the mask had covered were a horrifying, deep red, as if boiled. Her skin was covered in a dense carpet of blisters. Some had already burst, oozing a yellowish fluid. Worst of all, the skin on her cheekbones and chin had turned a ghastly, grayish white, the color of a chemical burn, with blackened, necrotic edges. Waves of excruciating pain washed over her, so intense she nearly fainted. My face! My face! Staring at the demonic reflection in the mirror, Clara let out a scream so terrible it barely sounded human. She reached a trembling hand to her face, but the second her fingertips brushed against the hot, blistered, and weeping skin, a spasm of agony shot through her entire body. Maria! Maria! She shrieked, stumbling out of the bathroom. Maria rushed in and saw Clara's face. She screamed, her legs giving out from under her as she collapsed to the floor. Miss Clara, your face. What happened to your face? The mask. It was the mask. The Elysian mask. Clara clutched her ruined face, the pain making her sob uncontrollably. A grotesque mixture of pus, blood, and tears seeped through her fingers. The hospital. We have to get you to the hospital. Maria scrambled to her feet and rushed to help her. Elysian. Julian. It was him. It had to be him. He wanted to destroy my face. He wants me to suffer. Through the agony and despair, Clara finally understood the true, malicious intent behind the gift. It wasn't salvation. It was the cruelest form of torture imaginable. He had come for the last thing she had left, the one thing she cherished most. On the way to the hospital, Clara drifted in and out of consciousness from the pain. When the emergency room doctor saw her, he drew in a sharp breath. Severe chemical burns. Get a trauma cart. Page dermatology and plastics now. This is critical, he barked at the nurses. The sting of antiseptic washing over her raw, weeping flesh was a fresh wave of agony. Clara was strapped to a gurney, her screams inhuman. The doctors and nurses, their faces hidden behind masks, worked with grim urgency. Doctor, my face. Can it be fixed? During a pause in the debridement, Clara asked, her voice a ragged, desperate rasp. The attending physician looked at the large patches of necrotic tissue and the deep second-degree burns. He was silent for a moment before sighing, his voice tinged with pity. Miss Vance, the corrosion is very deep. It's damaged the dermis, possibly even the subcutaneous tissue. The necrotic areas. I'm afraid that damage is irreversible. Even with multiple skin grafts, it will be very difficult to restore your original appearance. The scarring. It will be severe and permanent. The words struck her like a bolt of lightning. Clara's last shred of hope was obliterated. She lay on the cold gurney, numbly allowing the doctors to work on her ruined face, tears and pus tracking down her ravaged cheeks. The physical pain was nothing compared to the death of her soul. Julian Davenport, you are evil. You destroyed my family, my reputation, my father. And now, you've destroyed the last piece of my humanity, my face. In the ashes of her despair, a monstrous, all-consuming hatred began to grow, coiling around her heart like a venomous vine. The pain of her disfigurement was the fuel, and her hatred was the fire. The hospital smelled of antiseptic. In a private room, Clara lay like a mummy, most of her face swathed in thick gauze bandages. Only her eyes were visible, eyes that once sparkled with life, but now held only a dead, venomous emptiness. The diagnosis was a final verdict, condemning her to a living hell. Every time the nurses changed her dressings, revealing the grotesque, corroded flesh underneath, it was like being flayed alive all over again. Mirrors became her greatest terror. She knew she was ruined, inside and out. Maria hovered by her side, secretly wiping away tears, carefully feeding her broth. The Vance family was officially bankrupt. The house was gone, their assets seized. Clara's mother was a vegetable in the ICU, kept alive by Julian's charity, a constant, cruel reminder of his power. Maria was paying for this private room by selling off the last of her own jewelry. As Clara stewed in her hatred, there was a knock on the door. Maria opened it to find two men in sharp suits, their expressions grim. We're from the legal department of Davenport Industries. The lead man flashed his credentials, his voice cold. Miss Clara Vance, we are here to officially serve you with legal documents pertaining to your adultery and the severe reputational damage caused to our client, Mr. Julian Davenport and his company. We are also here regarding the numerous outstanding debts owed to Davenport Industries by your late father, Mr. Arthur Vance. Please sign to acknowledge receipt. A thick stack of documents was handed to Maria. Her hands trembled as she took them. From the bed, Clara stared at the two lawyers, a guttural, rattling sound coming from her throat, thick with malice. Furthermore, the second lawyer added, his tone flat, based on the conclusive evidence we possess, you are implicated in a long-term scheme with Mr. Leo Martinez to defraud Mr. Julian Davenport of marital assets. The amount is substantial, constituting felony fraud. Concurrently, regarding the incident in which you sustained injuries from using a skincare product of unknown origin, while a personal matter, it has generated negative social consequences. Mr. Davenport reserves the right to pursue legal action against you for slandering the Elysian brand, which is a majority-owned subsidiary of Davenport Industries. Felony fraud? Slander? Clara's pupils constricted in a blaze of fury. Julian had orchestrated the destruction of her face, and now he was going to sue her for fraud and slander. You're lying. It was him. Julian Davenport tried to kill me. The mask he sent was poisoned. Clara tried to sit up, but the movement pulled at the raw flesh on her face, sending a jolt of pain through her. The lawyer's expression didn't change. Miss Vance, I advise you to watch what you say. We have an unbroken chain of evidence. If both cases go to trial, given the enormous sums involved, marital asset misappropriation, fraud, and reputational damages claims totaling over $150 million, and the extreme negative social impact, you will be facing a sentence of, conservatively, 20 years to life, with little to no chance of parole. Given your current physical condition, it is likely you would spend the remainder of your life in a prison hospital. 20 years. A prison hospital. The rest of her life. The cold, hard words hammered down on Clara. Prison. That dark, sunless place. With her ruined face, her broken body, it would be a death sentence. A slow, humiliating death. An overwhelming terror washed over her, colder and more powerful than her hatred. Julian didn't just want her ruined and alone. He wanted to lock her in the deepest, darkest pit of hell and throw away the key. No, I don't want to go to prison. I don't. Clara's voice was a distorted, terrified whisper, her bandaged face trembling uncontrollably. Mr. Davenport, however, in consideration of your past relationship, the lead lawyer said, his tone still frigid, and taking into account that your current mental and physical state may be unstable. He emphasized the word unstable. He has offered an alternative. The lawyer reached into his briefcase and slowly produced another document, placing it on Clara's hospital bed. On the cover, printed in cold, bold letters, were the words, Stonegate Psychiatric Facility Inpatient Diagnostic Evaluation and Recommendation. Clara's eyes locked onto those words, and her heart stopped. According to an evaluation conducted by a leading psychiatric expert at Mr. Davenport's request, the lawyer's voice was like a judge reading a verdict. You, Miss Vance, after suffering a series of severe traumas, are exhibiting symptoms of extreme post-traumatic stress disorder, severe depression with psychotic features, such as persecutory and referential delusions, and a clear pattern of self-harming behavior, evidenced by your use of an unknown substance that resulted in catastrophic self-injury. Your mental state renders you incapable of making sound decisions and poses a potential threat to yourself and others. The expert strongly recommends immediate inpatient treatment in a secure facility. Psychotic? Secure facility? Stonegate. That place was infamous, a modern-day asylum from which no one ever seemed to return. Clara's breathing grew ragged, her face twisting in terror beneath the gauze. She had heard the stories. It was worse than prison. It was a tomb for the living. The people sent there were treated like animals, drugged, shocked, restrained. Forever. Mr. Davenport is being merciful, the lawyer said, a hint of cruelty in his voice. He is willing to cover all your treatment costs at this facility and will sign an agreement stating that as long as you cooperate with your treatment and no longer pose a threat to society, he will not press charges for fraud or slander. This is your only alternative to prison. 2 choices, 2 paths to hell, laid out before her. Path 1. Branded a felon and a fraud. Wearing this monstrous face, she would be thrown into the darkness of prison to be beaten, abused, and forgotten for the next 20 years. Path 2. Branded a lunatic, she would be locked away in a place even more terrifying than prison, to be treated until she was no longer human, erased from the world, alive but not living. Either way, it was a cage Julian had built just for her. He didn't want her dead. He wanted her to suffer, to live in the most degrading, painful way imaginable. The lawyer looked at the trembling woman on the bed, as if she were a lamb awaiting slaughter. Miss Vance, Mr. Davenport is giving you 3 days to decide. We will return then for your voluntary decision. Of course, he paused, adding, should you choose inpatient treatment to ensure your safety and the safety of others, the facility will provide the highest level of protective restraint. You will need to be aware of this and voluntarily sign the consent form. Protective restraint. The words conjured images of straitjackets, cage-like beds, mind-numbing drugs, and electroshock therapy. Clara's body began to shake violently, her teeth chattering. Get some rest, Miss Vance. And think carefully. Like two automatons who had completed their task, the lawyers gave a slight nod and left the room, leaving behind the 2 death sentences and a suffocating, absolute despair. Maria watched the broken woman on the bed, her own tears flowing freely, helpless. Clara stared at the asylum report. The last flicker of light in her eyes went out, replaced by a thick, inky darkness, a swirling vortex of madness and hatred. The terror and despair had burned away everything else. Julian Davenport, you are poison, pure poison. The 3 days passed like 3 years. The air in the cheap hospital room was thick and heavy. Clara lay motionless, a true mummy, her only sign of life the shallow rise and fall of her chest. Her visible eyes stared blankly at the stained ceiling, roiling with a dead calm that concealed a hurricane of fear and hatred. Maria tiptoed around her, barely daring to breathe. She knew what choice Clara was facing. She had glanced at the documents. Each time, her heart had turned to ice. Prison or the madhouse. That man was truly determined to destroy her. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, there was a knock on the door. It was the same 2 lawyers, appearing like grim reapers to collect a soul. Miss Vance, your time is up. What is your decision? The lead lawyer asked, his voice devoid of emotion. Clara's eyes swiveled slowly, fixing on them as if they were demons from hell. A dry, rasping sound came from her throat as she forced out the words. I choose. She paused, as if the effort was draining the last of her life force. The room was so quiet Maria could hear her own heart pounding. Clara's gaze, filled with a venomous, bottomless hatred, fell upon the document titled Stonegate Psychiatric Facility. Her body began to tremble so violently that the gauze on her face seemed to rustle. I choose to go to Stonegate. Each word was a shard of glass, torn from her throat, from her bleeding heart, saturated with a terror and hatred that went bone deep. The madhouse. Maria covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She knew what this meant. The lawyer showed no surprise. He nodded, took another document from his briefcase, and placed it in front of her, along with a pen. Very good. This is your voluntary admission for treatment application and the informed consent for protective restraint measures. Please sign here, and provide a thumbprint. The word voluntary was laced with a thick, biting sarcasm. Clara reached out a trembling hand, the one not attached to N4. The hand that had once worn diamond rings was now pale and skeletal, marred by bruises and needle marks. She took the pen, but it hovered over the signature line, shaking too violently to write. To sign this was to personally shove herself into a living tomb, to surrender her freedom, her rights, her very identity as a human being. Miss Vance, please don't waste our time, the lawyer urged. If you've changed your mind and prefer prison, we can call the police right now. Prison, the asylum, prison. The 2 demons toward her mind. In the end, the fear of the known violence of prison, of having her ruined face exposed to endless cruelty, won out over the unknown horrors of the asylum. At least there, they might cover her face. At least Julian had promised to pay, which meant her mother might be kept alive. Arg! A short, animalistic cry escaped her lips. She squeezed her eyes shut and, with every ounce of strength she had left, she scrawled a crooked, spidery signature on the voluntary admission form. Then, she pressed her thumb onto an ink pad and stamped a bloody, crimson print over her name, a seal of surrender. Next came the consent form for protective restraint. Staring at the cold, clinical phrases, use of straitjacket, restraints, isolation room, medication, and physical therapies as deemed necessary. Clara's hand shook even more violently. She was on the verge of breaking, but there was no way back. Gritting her teeth, she signed her name and stamped her thumbprint again. 2 red thumbprints, like 2 drops of blood from her heart, stamped on her ticket to hell. The lawyer carefully inspected the signatures and prints, then placed the documents back in his briefcase, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. The paperwork is complete. The transport from Stonegate is waiting downstairs. Miss Vance, please prepare for your admission. His voice, still cold, now carried the unmistakable thrill of power over life and death. No, you can't take her. She's not crazy. She's not. Maria finally broke, throwing herself in front of the lawyers, sobbing. One of the lawyers easily blocked the frail, old woman. "Ma'am, do not interfere with a patient's treatment. Miss Vance has consented voluntarily, and we have a professional medical diagnosis. Any further obstruction, and we can have you charged." Maria froze, silenced by his cold glare. She watched in horror as two burly men in white orderly uniforms entered the room. In their hands was a thick canvas straitjacket. "No, don't. Get away from me. I'm not crazy. Julian Davenport. I curse you. I curse you to hell." The sight of the straitjacket, the ultimate symbol of lost freedom and dignity, made Clara snap. She shrieked, thrashing wildly on the bed. The hand with the foreline ripped out the needle, and blood spurted onto the white sheets. But her struggle was futile. The two orderlies pinned her down with practiced ease. One of them efficiently forced the straitjacket over her torso. The rough canvas was cold and tight. The long sleeves crossed behind her back and buckled securely, pinning her arms in an unbreakable hold. She was bound like an animal. "Arg, let me go. You monsters. You animals. Julian Davenport. I'll haunt you from my grave." Completely restrained, Clara could only scream, her voice muffled and distorted by the pressure of the jacket on her chest. She writhed on the bed like a landed fish, the violent movements causing fresh blood and pus to seep through the gauze on her face, mixing with her tears in a horrifying, grotesque mask. Maria, held back by one of the lawyers, could only watch, collapsing to the floor in a weeping heap as her mistress was bound and treated like a rabid dog. Ignoring Clara's curses, the orderlies dragged her from the bed and hauled her roughly toward the door. "Time to go, Miss Vance." The lawyer's voice was the final toll of a funeral bell. "Time to go to the place where you can finally get some rest." Clara was dragged from the room and into the elevator that would take her down to hell. Her final demonic curse echoed down the hospital corridor. "Julian Davenport, I hate you." The black, unmarked ambulance, like a plague wagon, drove silently away from the dilapidated hospital, heading toward the city's edge, toward the dark, mountain-shadowed place known as Stonegate. Inside the van, it was dark and cramped. Clara was trussed up in the straitjacket, dumped on a cold metal gurney. Her throat was raw from screaming, and now she could only manage ragged, heavy breaths, her body trembling with a mixture of terror and rage. The sweat-soaked bandages on her face clung to her open wounds, each breath a fresh stab of pain. But the physical agony had gone numb. What was truly devouring her was the bone-deep fear and a hatred for Julian so vast and fiery it could burn down the world. Stonegate. What would it be like? Cold iron bars? Endless electric shocks? Drugs that turned you into a zombie? And the other patients? The real lunatics. The van began to climb a winding mountain road. The trees grew thicker, the light dimmer. The very air seemed to become cold and heavy. With every turn of the road, Clara's heart sank deeper into a bottomless abyss. After what felt like an eternity, the van stopped. The grating shriek of a heavy iron gate being pulled open cut through the silence. A thick, chemical smell, disinfectant mixed with something old and desperate, wafted in, making Clara's stomach churn. She was hauled out of the van. The glare of a spotlight hit her as she squeezed her eyes shut. When she opened them, she saw it. Towering walls topped with electric fences. Gates as thick and imposing as a fortress. And above the entrance, the cold, metal letters. Stonegate Psychiatric Facility. The buildings were a depressing, monolithic gray, with small, heavily barred windows. The entire place radiated a dead, oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional, distant shriek or sob that made the silence even more terrifying. Two new orderlies, dressed in dark blue uniforms, took over. They grabbed Clara and dragged her through the gate, which slammed shut behind them with a deafening clang, sealing her off from the world forever. Inside was a long, brutally white corridor. The walls were a pale, sickly green. The floor was polished concrete that reflected the harsh fluorescent lights. The chemical smell was stronger here, mixed with the faint stench of waste and despair. On either side were heavy, closed metal doors, each with a small, barred observation window. As they passed one of the doors, a twisted face suddenly pressed itself against the window. It was a woman with matted, straw-like hair and wild, vacant eyes. A strange, foolish grin was plastered on her face as drool trickled from her lips. She stared at Clara, a low, gurgling laugh rumbling in her throat. Ah! The sudden apparition terrified Clara, and she screamed. "Shut up. New meat's got to learn to be quiet," one of the orderlies growled, jabbing her hard in the ribs with his elbow. The sharp pain stole her breath, leaving her with only a choked whimper. She was dragged to a room at the end of the hall. It was empty except for a single metal chair bolted to the floor. They forced her into it and unlocked the back of her straitjacket, allowing her arms some movement, but keeping her torso tightly bound. A doctor in a white coat and glasses entered. His eyes were as cold and lifeless as chips of ice. "Name?" he asked, his voice flat. Clara gritted her teeth and said nothing. The doctor, unfazed, made a note on his clipboard. Patient Clara Vance. Admitting diagnosis. Severe depression with psychotic features, including persecutory delusions. PTSD. Exhibiting severe self-harming and aggressive tendencies. Requires level 1 protocol. He put down the clipboard. Take her to her room. Change her into a uniform. And prep her for initial stabilization treatment. Her room. Clara was hauled to her feet again and dragged down another corridor to a heavy iron door. An orderly unlocked it and shoved her inside. The space was a tiny, windowless box. The only furniture was a metal slab of a bed, welded to the floor. In the corner was a toilet, stinking of ammonia. The walls were covered in thick padding. A single, dim bulb cast a pale, sickly light from the ceiling. The room was so small, so oppressive, it felt like being buried alive. "Get in," an orderly barked, shoving her so hard she fell to the cold floor. A set of gray and white striped pajamas, as coarse as a burlap sack, was thrown in after her, landing on her head. "Change. Now." Clara stared at the uniform, the tears of humiliation welling up again. With trembling hands, under the cold, watchful eye of the orderly, she stripped off her own soiled clothes. When the straitjacket was finally removed, she instinctively tried to cover her ruined face and body. "Hurry up," he snapped. Shaking with shame, she put on the rough uniform. The fabric scraped against her raw face and the bruises on her body. The moment she was dressed, an orderly came back in, holding a large syringe filled with a cloudy, white liquid. "No, what is that? I don't want a shot." Clara scrambled backward, pressing herself into a corner. "This will help you stabilize," the orderly said, advancing on her. "Cooperate, or we'll make you. Get away from me. I'm not sick. I don't want it." She screamed, trying to fight back. But it was useless. Another orderly joined the first, and they easily pinned her down. The cold swipe of an alcohol swab on her arm made her flinch. Then, the thick needle plunged in her vein. The cloudy, cold liquid was forced into her body. "Arg!" Clara screamed, a wave of dizziness and numbness washing over her. Her strength vanished. Her vision swam. "Take her to the treatment room," she heard the doctor's cold voice say, as if from a great distance. She was lifted and dragged out of the tiny cell, down the white corridor, deeper into the unknown hell. Her body was heavy, her mind sinking into a drug-induced fog. But deep in her soul, the burning, all-consuming hatred for Julian Davenport blazed even brighter. "Julian, Julian, I'll come for you. Even as a ghost, I'll come for you." 6 months later, the Pinnacle, the city's most exclusive revolving restaurant. Through the sweeping, floor-to-ceiling windows, the New York City skyline glittered below, a river of stars at his feet. Soft piano music filled the air, mingling with the scent of prime steak and aged Bordeaux. At the best table, Julian Davenport sat alone. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored, dark gray suit, his lean frame exuding an aura of immense power. In one hand, he swirled a glass of Romanée-Conti, the deep red liquid catching the light like a liquid ruby. His face, handsome as a marble statue, was just as cold. On the table before him, a prime cut of A5 Wagyu ribeye, seared to perfection, rested on a silver platter. He seemed in no hurry to eat. His gaze was fixed on a slim, high-definition screen embedded in the wall beside his table. It was playing a silent, live feed from a security camera. The feed was from a special observation room at Stonegate Psychiatric Facility. In the stark, white light, a figure in a gray and white striped uniform was huddled on the floor. Her hair had been crudely shaved short, revealing a pale, blotchy scalp. Her face. It was no longer a face. It was a grotesque landscape of thick, raised keloid scars, a dark, reddish-purple mass that pulled her features into a permanent, distorted grimace. Her mouth was twisted to one side. One eye, caught in the scarred tissue, could no longer close completely, revealing a sliver of milky white. Her gaze was dull, vacant, fixed on nothing. A low, guttural, meaningless sound escaped her lips as drool trickled from the corner of her twisted mouth, pooling on the floor. Her hands were bound in front of her with heavy leather restraints. Her ankles were shackled, connected by a short chain that allowed only a clumsy shuffle. Around her neck was a thick, padded collar to prevent biting. Suddenly, A small slot at the bottom of the room's heavy iron door slid open. A plastic tray with a gray, pasty substance was shoved through, clattering onto the floor. The figure on the floor jolted like a startled animal. A raw, primal greed flashed in her cloudy eyes. A desperate, gasping sound came from her throat as she began to crawl, with a clumsy, insect-like motion, toward the tray. The restraints made her movements awkward and slow. When she finally reached it, she didn't bother with her bound hands. Like a dog, she lowered her head and plunged her face directly into the mush, gobbling it down with loud, disgusting, smacking sounds. The gray paste smeared all over her scarred face and patchy hair, making her look even more filthy and subhuman. The camera captured her animalistic feeding in perfect clinical detail. Julian watched, impassive. He raised his wine glass and took a small sip. The complex, velvety notes of the world's finest wine coated his tongue. His expression was a complete blank. No disgust, no pity, not even a flicker of interest. The feed switched to another camera. This one was in a treatment room. The same figure was now strapped into a metal chair, her limbs held down by thick leather belts. A doctor in a white coat held 2 electrodes, which he roughly pressed against her temples. The woman's mouth opened in a silent, terrified scream, her body straining against the restraints, her eyes bulging. The doctor coolly flipped a switch. Even without sound, you could almost feel the jolt of high-voltage electricity. Her body arched violently, convulsing, bucking against the straps like a fish on a line. Her scarred face contorted into a mask of pure agony, her mouth stretched wide in a scream no one could hear, spittle flying from her lips. Her eyes rolled back in their sockets, showing only the whites. The shock lasted for 10 seconds. When it stopped, she slumped in the chair like a boneless doll, twitching faintly. A dark stain spread across the front of her uniform. Julian's gaze swept over the scene. He picked up his silver knife and fork and, with elegant precision, sliced off a small piece of his steak. The blade slid through the tender meat, revealing a perfect, pink center. He lifted the piece to his mouth. The rich, buttery flavor of the wagyu, the subtle crust of salt and pepper, exploded on his palate. He closed his eyes for a moment, savoring it. When he opened them again, he looked back at the screen. The feed had returned to the cell. The figure was a heap in the corner, her body giving an occasional, spastic twitch. Her eyes were completely vacant. She was no longer a person. She was just a thing, a piece of flesh, breathing in and out, utterly and irrevocably broken. Julian raised his glass and drained the last of the wine. The cool liquid went down, leaving a trail of warmth. He picked up his napkin and dabbed his lips, his movements unhurried and graceful. Then, he picked up his phone and opened a locked photo album. There was only one picture inside. The first one he had taken that night, 6 months ago. The high-definition image of Clara and Leo, naked and entangled on the marble floor, her face a mask of ecstatic, shameless pleasure. Julian looked at the photo, then back at the live feed of the monstrous, drooling creature in the asylum. A faint, cold, chilling smile, a smile of absolute power, of devastating, triumphant revenge, slowly spread across his handsome lips, like a crack forming in a sheet of ice. He put down his phone, picked up his knife and fork, and took another bite of his steak. It was exquisite. Outside, the city lights burned as brightly as ever, a feast for the eyes that never ended. And inside Julian's heart, the fire of vengeance had finally burned itself out, leaving behind only cold, hard ash and the supreme, intoxicating feeling of a god who held the power of life and death in his hands.